You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. We live F1. Welcome to Missed Apex Podcast. I'm your host, Richard Reddy, but my friends call me Spanners, so let's be friends. We're doing something a bit different in our midweek show. Of course, we're an independent podcast produced in the podcasting shed. With the kind permission of our better halves, we aim to bring you a race review before your Monday morning commute. We might be wrong, but we're first, and sometimes during the week, we try and bring you random arguments from grumpy middle-aged men, and I think we can achieve that aim today if we just believe and try our hardest. So today, for no reason at all, I've assembled a mega crew to try and find out our ultimate 21st century grid. So we're going to include all drivers from 2000 onwards. Yes, I know, technically, etc., the century started in 2001, but the loud majority will overrule us. So we're going to go from drivers who raced at any time during 2000 are eligible, which means that Pedro Dinez could be on our ultimate grid, and also Yarno Trulli could be on our ultimate grid, but Damon Hill, whose last race was in 1999, can't make it. So those drivers at their peak season, whenever it was in their career, in whatever car suits them, judging them by how they did during their era of F1. So that's what we're going to do today, and I need to assemble a crew of relatively old people. So it's Matt Two Rumpets. How's it going, Matt?
Reliability equals performance.
Are we doing engines here?
How could I not be? They're meeting on Friday about it.
I'm triggered about Renault whinging that, we can't build a good enough engine, so you have to help us. Oh, really? So we're going to do that with Aero as well, are we?
Again, this is the second time in this century they've had an engine freeze and somehow fallen behind during the freeze and had to ask for permission to catch up. It's fantastic.
And Red Bull are fully supporting their efforts to get engine equalization for 2026, which I find massively sus. And I'm sure we'll cover that at some point during the summer.
A little slip from Veery that says, "We owe you one, Red Bull."
There we go. Oh, how did this youngster get into this olden days chat? It's Jonathan Simon. What are you doing here, you young pup?
Yeah. Oh, I'm not sure. I think we needed, when you said 21st century grid, I'm like, we need to make sure Webber's on there, Ricciardo and Piastri. So I'm here to do all three. And I brought a friend with me too to make sure.
And it's a bit of an Aussie takeover as we've got our video editor, Steve Amy. How's it going, Uncle Steve?
It's good. Morning, afternoon, and evening, folks. All I'm going to say is, when it comes to tonight's topic, some of me is right and the rest of you is wrong.
Oh, hello. I've already seen your list, Steve, and we definitely have a few scraps coming.
Oh, well, I'm up for it.
And you're the only person who I think here has watched more F1 pre-2000 than post-2000.
Oh, pretty much, yeah. I must be getting about the same now. Yes. I mean, I started watching in 78, so that's 22 years, and it's been 22 years since 2000, roughly, so about the same.
We welcome your sage and experienced input as we decide the ultimate 21st century grid. All right, first things first, guys, we need to argue about how we're going to do this. So I'm going to start with the champions. So I suggest we start with the champions who've won a title since 2000, and then we go to our kind of midfield nominations. And I think that will fill up a 20-car grid. So we'll go for 20 because that looks like we're staying for the moment at 20 in modern F1. And then we'll go for our wild cards. But the further we go down our list, the more we have to knock out people who have already entered our top 20. Okay, is there any objection to that format? Of course there is, from Matt. Of course there is.
Of course I'm going to object. Like, you were thinking about this all wrong. Because I'm imagining in my head, you used the word best, and you just thought, we want the best drivers.
Yes, I did.
But that's boring. They're just the best drivers. You need the best contest to be really exciting. So I'm going to suggest that every person we pick needs their nemesis attached to them.
Yeah, no, that's not a bad shout. So, for example, I'll give you one example straight up. Like when I was looking at Montoya, a lot of his like standout races were against Schumacher. And I think that goes in his favor.
Right. I was going to use Hamilton and Rosberg, for example, because Rosberg being the only person I ever saw really get under Hamilton's skin. But that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Uncle Steve?
Well, I've got a question since you're talking about
All right,
rules.
format, yeah.
Is this supposed to be based in reality, or is this some sort of fantasy, grid game that we're playing?
Well, looking at your list, a mix of both, Steve. we have both. We both.
I think yours has got. Sorry, mate.
Yeah, no, we all put up our list in our private show notes here, so we've all had a good chuckle at each other's, and some arguments have started to brew already.
So are we doing? Is 2000 considered part of the century? Because technically it's not.
I know.
But we're considering for this 2000 is part of the century just to make it easier.
Most people think incorrectly that 2000 is part of this century, so we're just going to go with that.
Cool. And then because the thing is now, and the reason why 2000 is critical, because 01 Mika Hakkinen was, and we'll get into it, a farewell tour. Here's a rule we'll put in right now, and it's coming from me: no farewell tour drivers. So if it's 2001 and they're going on a farewell tour, that is disqualified.
So let me
get Hakkinen 2000.
Let me clarify: any driver who drove in the 21st century is eligible, even if their best drives were, say, in 1995. So you can completely have Hakkinen. In fact, the driver who joined latest that you can have is Jos Verstappen. So Jos Verstappen, even though he joined into the 90s, still drove in a year that began with 2. And then so you can basically have from Verstappen to De Vries in new entries. So here's some stats, actually, about the amount of drivers that have raced in the 21st century. There's 137 drivers to pick from. And just to give it a little bit of perspective, 57 drivers have joined since Lewis Hamilton did. If you're a Lewis Hamilton fan. So that's since 2007, and 69 drivers are eligible for this that joined before Lewis Hamilton. So from Verstappen to De Vries, let's pick our grid. Okay, so let's start off with the champions. So can we just quickly dismiss, is there anybody here who would not put Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen on our best 21st century grid? So we don't have to argue about those guys, surely.
Well, no, I'm not arguing about that. And surely not any champion on this list. You look at the list and you go, if a champion doesn't make it, and even Jenson Button, who won the championship in 2009, you have to say, lucked into a great car. But he deserves to be on this grid regardless.
Okay, so...
Oh, you were so immediately wrong. I love this.
Our first argument. Okay, brilliant. Uncle Steve, tell Jono why he's wrong.
Well, there's at least one champion there that shouldn't make it onto the grid at all, onto the, into the champions list. And that's a particular German who retired last year. I think he's a pretty ordinary driver, but he was in a very good car, and there was absolutely no other opposition.
So, okay,
those 4 years. And as soon as he got, as soon as we got to 2014, he died and went nowhere.
Oh man! So look, Matt's furious at both of you here. So for completely different reasons. So if I say order, okay, we'll try and settle this to some kind of reason. Please respect the chair. Okay, Matt, you've heard two opinions there. You've heard the case for Jenson Button and against Vettel. So which one do you want to fight with first?
I didn't hear a case for Button other than that he drove in the 2000s.
Please.
What car did he win his championship in?
The Brawn.
Well, yes, he won his in a Honda.
Yeah, in the Brawn 01.
In the Brawn 01. And is that not the one he was with Barrichello? Am I correct?
That is true.
And if I'm not entirely mistaken, did he just simply not luck into, through mechanical ineptitude of the team, an initial championship lead that they just then doubled down on for the rest of the season? I'm pretty sure Barrichello was more or less beating him like a gong in that car, as was most of the rest of the grid by the end of the season. He just had such a big head start and enough people took points off each other that they couldn't catch him. But in no way. Now, look, You want to make an argument for Button as like a midfielder or a journeyman, you might have a stronger point. But as a champion, nah.
I agree with you.
If I had to pick Vettel or Button, I take Vettel every time. He won 4 seasons on the jump, and only three of them were actually most.
Okay, hang on. I'm gonna have to fade the panel down here. Order. Right, that's the first time I've ever heard Matt get so passionate that you actually clipped out your mic. Like yelling into your mic. Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that.
No, it's absolutely fine. The passion there is incredible. So the accusation there, Jono, is that Button completely lucked into it, didn't actually do particularly well in that season, and then did nothing around that championship in his career to show that he should make the top 20 of the 21st century. Your response?
You're talking about a guy who's won 15 races this century alone for 3 different teams. And he's not going to make the best 20 drivers of the last 23 years now.
That's a good point, Matt.
Come on.
Matt,
that
that's
is
a good
silly.
point.
I mean, if you're going to say that, Matt, right, then you might as well take Kimi Raikkonen out of it because somehow he lucked into a 2007 Ferrari.
I'm only including Raikkonen for the press conferences, my friend.
I actually had forgotten that Kimi won the 2007 World Championship because he was nowhere. He was nowhere in that championship. Okay, so at the moment, right, I think Button is going to be at the bottom of my list. So I've got definites, Hamilton, Verstappen. I think at the moment, Jono, you're on your own. So I'm putting Button in the maybe list, and he might be one of the first ones to get shuffled off. For example, when I suggest Kobayashi. So let's move on then. Sebastian Vettel as a champion. Does he make it into the top 20? So Steve's made a reasonable case that he hasn't. Who's saying yes? Okay, we'll go for Jono. Jono, make the case for. Since you've already lost one, maybe you can win this one.
And look, if we could have a year of Vettel, like a vintage of him, take the 2010 version. That's the funnest Vettel that I saw personally as a driver, because you had a mix of everything. He was funny. He hadn't won a world title yet. He was still ruthless, drove around like he was a dick on the racetrack and pissed off his teammate a little bit too. Had that. Also, at the same time, was so dominant in the car and had a lot of mechanical failures, still won a championship out of it. Yes, he had a great car. But I think Vettel proved that he's one of the best drivers this century. Don't you dare not put him in your top 20 for the entire century. Because do you guys realize there aren't that many good drivers this century if you're trying to go for a top 20? That's the problem.
He's not, for me, it's not a no-brainer for Vettel. And by the way, just to point out the Australians here, Keith in our Patreon live chat says, if you omit Vettel, you definitely can't have Webber. So are you sure, are you sure, Steve? Are you sure you want to omit Vettel?
I don't admit Vettel, and when it comes down to it, you may be surprised at my thoughts on Webber too.
I just assumed blind patriotism.
Well, there's a bit of that, but let's try and be realistic.
Yes, yeah. And look, and by the way, so a little bit of a spoiler looking ahead, that's exactly how I feel about Coulthard. Like, big Coulthard fan, really supported him at the time, haven't been able to find a universe where he makes my top 20, so I'll be in a similar position. But honestly, with Vettel, on a serious note, if anyone's going to defend him, and I think Matt will, he had a 4-year period where he looked really incredible against his teammate. But in that period, he was definitely the favoured number 1 driver. I don't think that's even controversial now. And apart from the odd multi-21 where they tried to let Webber stay ahead in the Shanghai, in the Chinese Grand Prix, really, like Vettel, from 2010 onwards, he looked like the better driver. Webber kind of threatened in 2010 and had a few really good results there. But he was definitely the number 2 driver. Vettel was favoured. Yes, he had a win in the 2008 Toro Rosso, but 2009, that could have been a Vettel championship. So you have to kind of put that down to, well, maybe another driver would have won that championship. Other drivers would have won 2017. Other drivers would have won 2018. He looked kind of ordinary against Leclerc, and he made Stroll look good. Where is the case that this is one of the best drivers of the 21st century, Matt?
You have literally made the case for me. He won all 4 years at Red Bull.
No, what? No.
He won 4 championships with Red Bull.
4 out of 5 years at Red Bull.
Well, I mean, the 4 championships he won was with Red Bull.
Yeah,
that's what I was. Of the 4 championships Red Bull won, he won all 4 of them.
Yeah, but he also missed.
And if you're going to,
I would just say he missed the chance to win a championship at Red Bull as well.
if you're going to make that a rule, then how is that any different than Verstappen and Perez right now at Red Bull? Perhaps we should kick Verstappen off because he's fighting against Perez and he's won 2 years with a car that's extremely dominant. But the argument actually to me goes to Ferrari, because at Ferrari in 2017, he made a closer run of it than anyone we had seen. And the last driver to come that close with Ferrari and not actually win it was Alonso. So if Alonso taking Ferrari to the edge counts for getting him on the list, we're not to him yet, then I'm going to argue that Vettel in two different teams, even though he didn't quite win with Ferrari, I mean, let's face it, Ferrari, if you even get within a mile of the championship, look at Leclerc, for example, you got to admit, that's not too bad. Plus, I mean, look at him banging wheels of Hamilton in the safety car line. How would you not want a driver who drives like that, yelling at his teammate over multi-21? How is that not entertaining? You've got to put him on the grid.
Hang on. Okay, so I'll just make the case, Jono, that Verstappen wins the 2017 championship in a Ferrari. Verstappen wins the 2018 championship in a Ferrari.
Oh, no. I disagree, because you're talking about a young, early Verstappen who's not 3 years now.
Okay, fair.
You know, so there's that case. But if you have Verstappen now, certainly he definitely makes it.
There was drivers around that would have won that title. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. But to add to Vettel's point, and what I really like Matt is doing is we're not just considering on-track success here. We're considering what's fun off-track, what's the intangibles.
Oh, he's
here.
Great. I think Vettel, he's a great guy. Yeah,
a great team leader. People love to have him in the garage. If you're a mechanic, if you're a team boss, he was great at all those aspects. You talk about a driver who, I mean, you say Leclerc had him. Leclerc didn't have him up until after Canada 2019, which was the changing point of Vettel's career. As soon as that penalty happened, he was upset about it. He said he lost passion in the sport. And since then, Leclerc had him. So I think Vettel still had it. Yeah, there were mistakes, retirements in his Ferrari years. By far, I think he's a definite on this grid. If you're not going to include a four-time world champion, regardless of how quick that car was, then you can't include Lewis Hamilton. You can't include Michael Schumacher. You can't include Max Verstappen.
Okay. We're going to spend a lot of time on Vettel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a mid-category for him at the moment because it's 2-2. It's 2-2. But I think my final... Okay, I'll let Matt come back at this. But my final case will be, after those 4 championships, ordinary against Ricciardo, didn't impress against Leclerc, obviously beat up on, a clear number 2 at Ferrari when he had the chance, made Stroll look pretty decent compared to what Alonso's doing now. I know he had those 4 championships, mate, but come on, like we know that he has since fallen very short, and that's come on, that's got to be something.
I'm going to use your rules against you because we get to pick them at their barnstorming best, regardless of the year.
You absolute genius!
Vettel
genius!
Is absolutely someone I want on the grid.
He wins. I think Steve. I think he wins for that.
We're back to fantasy land again now, are we?
No, Steve.
I thought this was supposed to be reality.
Steve, I think double diffuser peak Vettel in his era. It's going to have to be on the list. Well done, Matt. I yield to that, which makes it 3-1. Okay, so on our champions list, I think Michael Schumacher is a no-brainer simply because he redefined the sport. Was not a Michael Schumacher fan. Think he more than bent the rules. In fact, I'll go out and say he cheated at every available opportunity.
I think bludgeoned is a great word to use.
He bludgeoned the rules to death at every opportunity. But he's undoubtedly an all-time great. Pushed every single boundary of wheel-to-wheel racing, technical knowledge, and drivability. And the amount of drivers that said he could drive around a problem, Steve, there's no way that we can not include him on this list.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to agree with you. I was not a fan of his at all.
Me neither.
And I agree with you that he cheated whenever he could, and some of the things he did out on track to other drivers was just despicable. But he did change the whole nature of Formula One, and he's a force that no one could stop. So yes, he goes in absolutely.
And it was fascinating, wasn't it, to see Schumacher come back later in his career as well. And I'm not entirely convinced that age was particularly against him. He was probably every bit as good as a driver as he was, but he wasn't finding himself in the same competitive machinery. But his biggest problem was that he inspired a whole generation of the sport to say, right, the minimum standard is you've got to be as fit as Schumacher and you've got to race as hard as Schumacher. And so he started in a sport of 70s and 80s kind of heroes hanging out at the side of the car with a cigarette. And then when he came back in, he was fighting the monsters he created.
Yep, that's exactly right. And he, as you said, he was in an early Mercedes cars, and let's face it, they were absolute garbage until 2014. So he didn't do as well when he came back, but I think that he'd already earned enough leeway by then to get his spot in the top 10.
I was going to add that he adopted that from Senna, who adopted that from the drivers before. So they've all learned from each other. Yeah. And Schumacher, you're right, set the scene for fitness. Here's one problem for Michael Schumacher is as soon as he stepped out of the sport, I think that was his problem coming back. Had he taken a year off and then come back and not, the multiple years that he did, I think he would have been fine and still would have had the pace. Plus, being a 41, 42-year-old driver in the early 40s, like Fernando Alonso today, is a lot easier to do than 10, 15 years ago, where the fitness is different, the technology is all different. These cars, I think, are a little heavier and I'm not going to say easier to drive, but certainly not as difficult as they were, in my opinion, 15 years ago.
Connor Chaney says he also bludgeoned Villeneuve's side pod and Damon Hill's suspension wishbone. So that's true. That is true. And look, there's a few drivers that did this. So every driver that followed Schumacher had to be, as physically fit and an athlete as much as Schumacher was. I think in the Hamilton era as well, there was this kind of like ultimate aggression that Hamilton came in and surprised everyone with a little bit. And then Verstappen has taken that to another level. So like all this young breed of drivers that have come in and around Verstappen, they all drive like Verstappen now. And the longer Hamilton and Alonso stay in, for example, I think the more their natural raw aggression will be out-aggressioned by the kids coming through. Jono?
And it comes with maturity, because when Lewis Hamilton came in the sport, from his 07 to 2011 driving style is what you're seeing from Max Verstappen the last couple of years. Yeah. And as soon as he matured and got older, and you're starting to see that with Verstappen now, their style changes a little bit. They drive like it's still go-karts, back in their early years of F1 to these young guys. And eventually they find out like that they just get a bit more level-headed with it and understand the consequences and, wise their heads. But so far it's worked for Max Verstappen and it worked for Lewis Hamilton back then. So I guess they should keep the style, in my opinion. Okay,
so at the moment we have our 4 shoe-ins and Button hovering around the edges. And so our next champion to talk about is Fernando Alonso. I actually think this is another no-brainer. When you compare how Alonso has done to teammates, he has always consistently looked fast, and he's got some major flaws in his F1 career ability, which number one seems to be drama. He seems to cause drama wherever he goes, and that has backfired. His team selection is also very poor. I think all the teams he's driven for have won world championships, but only Renault have won a world championship with him in it. So flaws aside, as a pure racer, Steve, I truly think that Fernando Alonso, who I'm not a fan of, again falls into that Schumacher category, but I think one of the all-time greats.
Again, you and I are going to agree on this. I don't like Alonso at all. And I was a big Alonso fan when he first started. But I think the Renault debacle in, when was that, 2007? Well,
2008. You're talking about the Singapore one?
Yeah, 2008.
That was 2008,
I think that that soured him for me. But if you look at his stats and the number of wins and the number of podiums he's had, he is a very good racer, and he's still racing now, and he's still very competitive now. Sure, his car in the last couple of races hasn't been quite up to scratch, but he's also earned enough to go into that top 10 without a doubt. And as I said in my notes, much to my chagrin, I have to let him in.
For me, Jono, though, it's the teammate battles. Like, how many teammates have stood up to Fernando Alonso? Really only the statistically greatest F1 driver of all time, Lewis Hamilton.
That's true. And that's what makes Fernando Alonso so entertaining. He could be on this list on intangibles alone. Like, he doesn't have to be on here for his driving. He is the overall package, and I think will be the most entertaining driver we're going to have on this list, as far as I can think of it. Yeah, you can say, oh, let's bring in Kamui Kobayashi with his amazing overtakes and stuff, but he doesn't have all the other intangibles that Alonso had. He doesn't have the on-track talent. So I think Fernando is 100% a lock. But can I request that if we're going to put Fernando on this, can we have the 2010 Ferrari Alonso, which when you watched him in the red with his blue and and yellow and Spanish helmet, going, wow, that is the scariest driver-team combo I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, actually, I think that is probably peak Alonso, Steve, when he'd come from Renault and then he had all the stuff with Hamilton, then went to Ferrari to be that driver, to be the next Schumacher.
Sure, and I think the big problem was that Ferrari couldn't live up to that. He was ready for it, and I think that, slightly different time frame, he would have been a huge, winner and champion for Ferrari. You're right. He is, perhaps the most entertaining, or Jono's right, perhaps the most entertaining driver. He's also the most frustrating driver, I think. He shows so much promise, and his team let him down all the time, and he let himself down a lot of the time. So, he's one of those strange drivers, and he could have done a lot better for himself if he just used his position and his mental attitude to get himself not make such silly decisions, I suppose I should say, particularly about teams.
And Matt?
Well, I know, and I think you're right. Perhaps absolute peak Alonso was Ferrari Alonso. He almost won the champion, much like Vettel. If it weren't for Vitaly Petrov, he would have won that championship. Well, actually, it wasn't so much Petrov as it was terrible pit calls from the Ferrari. Oh, gosh, I'm repeating myself. Never mind. But to me, what sticks out from his early career, and that really, I think you're like, okay, here's a driver that we have to include, is his overtake around the outside of 130R on Schumacher.
Yeah.
On those treaded tires. It was just like, you're just like, who would even try that? And my only other note, and it's really a tiny one there, Spanners, is he's actually had two teammates to run him close. Hamilton and Ocon.
Oh my God, I knew you were going to do that. I was like, surely Matt's not going to ruin this by mentioning Ocon.
I mean, just from a statistical point of view, I'm not wrong here.
Okay,
at all.
It's the only mention Ocon will get in this program, so let him have it.
Oh, Steve, you're brutal. This is why I love having Aussies on. You guys, you don't care at all. Like, what's it like in Australia when you're all like that all the time?
It's the only Esteban that'll get mentioned in this podcast too. You could rule out all the Estebans from the 21st century.
Actually, I have another Esteban.
Yeah, I'm going to be
Chaos
fighting
Agent section,
hard
but
for
that's maybe
Gutierrez.
later.
Hard for Gutierrez. I'll be fighting. Good. Anyway, boring. I think we all agree with Alonso. Okay, so I did not imagine I would be going to bat for this driver when we started this segment, but the more and more I thought about it, the more I want to include Nico Rosberg in our top 20. Who's going to disagree with me? Because Matt's actually agreeing. I can't believe it.
No. So if you can't include Button, sorry, Spanners, you're going to have to put Rosberg in the maybe list. You got to have either one or the other.
I don't mind him going on the maybe list, like if there's room. But the case I want to make is remembering back to how he hit the scene in 2006. So I think he entered before Hamilton, and I think his first team was Williams. But I do remember people were genuinely talking about him as a phenomenon. Like his whole trajectory to F1 he was meant to be the next big thing. He was meant to basically be what we've got with Verstappen now, and Hamilton completely ruined it. And you can see Hamilton shadowed his karting, and they were good friends. But Hamilton was obviously just that little cut above. And then when they got to Mercedes together, Hamilton was already a world champion, which gave him an advantage within the team. He was, quote unquote, given that podium. I think it was at Sepang.
Malaysia.
Yeah, Malaysian Grand Prix, where Rosberg had the tyres at the end of the race and was all over him, but Hamilton was defending really hard, and they had to come on the team radio and say, Rosberg, hold position, stop fighting. And even Hamilton felt super guilty about that. And look, 2015, 2016, I genuinely think Hamilton had fully had the measure of Rosberg. He'd set up for the race, his race pace and his tyre management, especially in stint one, he had the measure of Rosberg completely. And in 2016, Rosberg was lucky. So I agree with you, Jono, that the Rosberg 2016 kind of equals the Button 2009. But 2014, Rosberg was every bit on pace, was every bit as fast as Lewis Hamilton. And for a twist of fate, but for gearbox selection in double points Abu Dhabi in 2014, Rosberg would have had that title. So that's why I want Rosberg on my grid, Jono.
He's probably the most fun driver we could have argued out of all these drivers so far right now as to whether he's a definite, a maybe. With Rosberg, he kind of the credit to him is he won those 9 races in a row, end of 2015, start of 2016, beat a Lewis Hamilton in 2016. And people can argue this, but I remember at 2016 saying this was the best we'd ever seen Lewis Hamilton drive an F1 car. And he still beat him that season. I think there's no question Nico Rosberg's severely underrated, was on fire in his early years, beat Michael Schumacher. The dude, I don't know, a maybe is almost an insult.
I would have liked Rosberg to, now looking back, because obviously I'm a Hamilton fan, but now I would have preferred Rosberg won 2014 than 2016. I think the record books would look more correct that way round. Put it that way. Matt.
Yeah, well, I have multiple reasons to include Rosberg. Number one, my theory of the nemesis. If you're going to have Hamilton on the grid, you need the one person who drives him absolutely nuts and can get under his skin and mess with him. And that's very clearly Nico Rosberg. Number two, my friend Jono, I love you casually mentioned, oh yeah, he beat Schumacher, a multiple world champion, quite thoroughly. Granted, it was Schumacher coming back to the chase after having been off, but he clearly beat him in that Mercedes. And had Niki Lauda not talked Hamilton into joining Mercedes in that hotel room, which sounds a bit dodgy, but whatever.
Yeah.
Then we could be talking about how many championships in a row Rosberg had won instead, because Russell has beat Hamilton to a championship. No, he hasn't had a chance. That's fair. Did Bottas ever beat him to a championship? Not even close. That's what I'm saying.
And this is what's fun about this. Let's say this is like a fantasy grid that we have to watch. Like it's a TV show tonight, and we're like, we just want to watch one F1 race with the 20 best drivers from this century.
That's what
I want Nico Rosberg on the grid, and I want him pissing off all the drivers who have won a championship and annoying them bit by bit every lap of the race. That's what I want to see.
Can I just say that this is my most begrudging one of drivers I was definitely not a fan of at the time, and then having to begrudgingly put them on our grid. This is absolutely the most gut-wrenching one for me. So I think we've made the case for Rosberg, and we still have a couple of champions from this century left. So we have Kimi Raikkonen, who was the 2007 champion, who I actually forgot to put on the list, because 2007 was not about Kimi Raikkonen at all. It was all about Hamilton versus Alonso. That was what the whole world was watching. And then Raikkonen kind of snuck in because McLaren just did some crazy stuff. So yes, there's rumors that because of Spygate and all that such a thing, they were told not to win the title. I don't really buy into any of that. But Hamilton could have been world champion, except for being inexplicably left out on wearing tyres.
Canvas. And there wasn't even tread left on that tyre when he came into the pit.
But everyone on the sofas was screaming at the TV saying, how are you leaving him out on those tyres? And then when he eventually tried to pit, he couldn't even get into the pit lane, and he went into the gravel, and that ended up, and then a gearbox failure, was it, in Interlagos, handed Kimi Raikkonen the title. So look, Kimi Raikkonen is a world champion. That was a funny one. Can we really point to the rest of his career and say, he should be on this top 20 of this century? Go on, Steve.
He was no doubt a very, very good driver. Yes, he only won one world championship. Button only won one in that period. And I think up until he retired and went away and went rally driving, I think that he was probably one of the very best drivers on the grid. I think he lost, his love of the sport and went away rally driving. And even when he came back for the money, not for the, the love of the sport. So up until when he went away rally driving, yes, I think that he did everything to, get a place on this top 20. What he did after when he came back and drove, I think was a little bit iffy. I don't think that he was, really had his heart and soul into it, although he had plenty of podiums in the period, beforehand, and he had a few after, but he only had one win, I think, after he came back.
To me, I know he's a bit of a hero for his quips, but I think, Steve, you've detailed the fact that he didn't definitely want to be there. So the definition of do you love your job is, if I gave you infinite money, would you still do it? So you give me infinite money, I'm still here yelling at Australians about F1 champions. That is still what I would do. I don't think Kimi Raikkonen necessarily falls into that category. And that kind of always sort of, because and it's jealousy because like you're literally living all our boyhood dreams and you kind of like, nah, I don't care so much. But Matt, once again, you're right. We're talking peak Raikkonen. Does he make this grid?
Well, I mean, that's a tough one. If you asked me about Raikkonen, I would pick him more for the press conferences and the off-track entertainment. Okay. And frankly, if we're talking Finns, I would take Hakkinen over Raikkonen.
Well, that's the next
we've
one.
Not gotten to him yet.
Okay. Raikkonen's a firm. I think he's on our maybe list, and he's behind Button and Rosberg in my mind.
The thing he does have is being, I think, is he possibly the oldest driver to have ever won a Formula One race in the modern era in this century? Because didn't he,
really?
or was it just that he beat Vettel? I can't remember. He did something at Circuit of the Americas.
Are you talking about Austin? Yeah,
or Podium.
Austin.
Maybe it was a Podium. I'm not sure.
No, he won the race.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm not wrong. I think he's the oldest driver to win something this century.
I think that was the only race he won after he came back.
Yeah.
Was that okay?
But anyway, so I mean, just for the old people, maybe you put him in there.
All right, one for the old people. Okay, so I think we know where Hakkinen is. But okay, so we know where Kimi is. Sorry, Mika Hakkinen for me was and I think still I can define him as a childhood hero. And his time in the Silver Arrows up against Coulthard, who I rated at the time, Steve. I think it's another shoe-in for me. I think Hakkinen is one of the all-time sports greats, if not a little bit of a stunted career.
Yeah, I'm a big Hakkinen fan and was when he was racing, and he gets a vote from me, even though both his championships were pre-2000. He was still racing. You know, he raced 2001, I think, was his last year. He was a great racer. He beat lots of other good drivers. Admittedly, he was in a good car in those days. They were half decent cars. But he had the right mental attitude. He had the right skill base. And I don't think there were many other drivers at that time that phased him.
Yeah.
Schumacher came along a little at the end of his reign and took over from him. And the races I remember between those two in 2000, 2001 were quite epic races. They were giving each other plenty of stick.
And also, I don't know if anyone's ever made this comparison, but Hakkinen and Leclerc, there's something about their attitudes to themselves and their internal psychology that I remember Hakkinen being really, really self-critical. So there was the famous one after he'd won his world championship, he took himself into the woods to berate himself, and there was a helicopter cam showing him punching the ground. And I saw an interview where he just said, he was just telling himself off, you're a world champion, how are you still making these mistakes? Very much beating himself up like Leclerc. And so I don't know, Jono, maybe I'm letting my heart and my fandom of him overtake raw stats.
But heart is what matters in F1, and you want a driver on the grid who you feel this way about. You a driver people root for. When you saw Mika Hakkinen crash at Monza, for example, in I think it was early 2000s and the late 90s, and him crying in the bushes.
That's the one I'm talking about. Was that Monza? Was it? Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what you want to see, because for me, it's if I said, if this is a TV show tonight and I'm flicking on, Netflix and I go, all right, I want to watch an F1 race with my fantasy grid. I want Mika Hakkinen on the grid, a driver who can take it to people on the track, emotional off the track. Well, actually, that's a little ironic because he didn't say much either. But
for a Finn, he says an awful lot.
Yeah,
for a Finn, and he's a very smart guy too. Now, here's the funny part about it. There's still a chance he could return to the F1 grid because he still hasn't retired.
Yeah,
he still hasn't officially
That's
announced that.
That's true.
So I'm hoping he comes back sometime soon.
Okay, and
you've got to give Hakkinen one thing. You've got to remember, when was it, 97 in Melbourne? He crashed badly and they thought that would be the end of his career. He had fairly nasty head injuries, if I remember right. And for someone to come back from that and win 2 world championships pretty well straight after it, that takes a huge amount of cojones to do that and dedication. And so he gets it for that, for me.
And I think we're being corrected on Raikkonen that he had won races in the Lotus. And didn't he win Abu Dhabi in the Lotus?
What Matt meant, I think, was in the turbo hybrids. I think he meant he was, because the Lotus wins will win the V8 era. Yeah.
Yeah. I just meant that my last memory of him winning was in that Ferrari at Circuit of the Americas. And I think that made him the oldest driver to have won in this century.
All right. Well, we are now moving past the champions as we decide our best grid of the 21st century. All right, let's get into our non-champion nominations then. Who fancies going for it? Oh, we forgot one champion. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Well, we forgot Jacques Villeneuve, who technically raced. And here's why. And Spanners, you know what? We're not to blame for this. His 21st century drives were not of a world champion. He was checked out of F1.
Right.
But he technically did win that 97 title. And if he did race in the 21st century, under our rules, remind our listeners, we are allowed to put him on the grid.
No, and I'm glad you said that, because I was always a fan of Jacques Villeneuve because he was a disruptor, really. And I was young and stupid, and he was also young and stupid at the time, and he came in, he's like, oh my goodness, he's dyed his hair slightly. How can this be? That's not very gentlemanly at all. But it did feel like he came in, as a little bit of a disruptor, a little bit of something different, and probably, one of the personalities of his time. I'm not actually convinced that we can put him in on Raw, like him at his best compared to his peers. Is he going to make the top 20 of the 21st century? So anyone want to make the case for him, or is this another a maybe?
The only case to be made for him is sheer entertainment.
There we go. So
and most of that was after he left F1.
Yes.
He's got a motor mouth and knows how to use it.
My goodness, does he have opinions? How doesn't he not have a podcast? Because a podcast is essentially, when a middle-aged white man loves his opinions very, very much, a podcast is born. So how on earth does Jacques Villeneuve not have one? We should reach out. Maybe he'll come and speak.
You've got to have a distributor who'll put up with him, though.
He seems to be everywhere. If Jacques Villeneuve farts, it is on motorsport.italia, isn't it? So anyway, right, okay, we'll put Villeneuve on our maybe, and I've got a feeling he'll be our first champion to get knocked off the list. Okay, so who would like to suggest some midfield drivers? Hands up. Matt had his hands up first. You were too slow, Jono. Go on, Matt. Give us a non-champion to add.
And I knew I had to do this now, or else it would never happen. But I'm going to suggest
Don't do
Jos Verstappen.
Oh.
If there's one person who could get into Max's head and really mess with him, it's got to be his dad. Think about it. Think about how genius that is.
Okay.
And not to mention, when he was at his peak in the 90s, was he not paired with Schumacher? Like, he had that same kind of mentality to go for it at all times that we saw young Max have. I'm just saying, he would be entertainment on the grid.
Order. Let's try and keep the crosstalk to a minimum. Passions are running high. So to defend Matt, he was making a little bit of a joke about the psychology of the father-son relationship. But he was a well-regarded driver by other F1 drivers. I think if you talk to other drivers of that time, Steve, they would rate him very highly.
Well, they're silly, aren't they?
Okay, there we go. Jono?
And this is important, because if you want an entertaining grid, we have never seen father and son on the same grid in F1. We've seen it in other sports. We've seen, Brundle pair with his son in Le Mans and different stuff. But that would be fun. And I think you should pair them as teammates. And I think you should give all the upgrades to Jos and see and Max would probably still beat him, but it's like kind of just to stir up Max a little bit. And then you get a really entertaining Max out of it. Not a bad suggestion, but that's just an insult to, what was it, Jensen, Rosberg,
he's not making
and
the
all
list.
the others we said were maybes as well.
He's not making the list. By the way, speaking of being inferior to your teammate, I've just found out that that I'm going to be guest appearing in a new karting series, and guess who my teammate's going to be? And imagine like the worst possible person who would be your karting teammate.
Lucas Degrassi.
Brad Philpott is going to be my teammate. So I'm going
that's almost as bad.
I'm going to look so awful against him. We're going to have exactly the same equipment in an owner driver series. You will get to see quite a lot of footage of this as well. So we'll make sure that gets to you. That's going to be a little bit later in the season. So I will know full well what it's like to be the likes of Brundle and Verstappen.
Just slip him a Mickey Finn before the race starts.
There's nothing that will stop him winning. I am going to have to stick a knife in his tyres. Anyway, right. So who was your suggestion, Jono, for your non-champ?
One of my favorite drivers growing up, Juan Pablo Montoya. And there's no question, I want the Montoya who is still fresh into F1 and is still had a little bit of a dusting of the politics that's annoyed him, but still got the grit and the passion to want to race in F1. Give me an 02 Juan Pablo over anyone else. And people in the Slack chat were saying, you know what, with this driver, you get these entertaining radio messages. You get that with Montoya. You get great on-track action. A fast driver, sticks up for himself. Hey, if you want enforcers, I think he's almost better than Nico Rosberg at enforcing.
Explain the term enforcer, because that's a common term in things like ice hockey.
Yes. So enforcer is basically a driver on the racetrack who's going to give it to other people, you know, who's going to be sort of a bully or a bruiser or somebody who can take it to the world championship drivers that we picked. If we want to watch a great fantasy 21st century grid, we want somebody who's going to make it entertaining, and we don't want somebody to drive off into the distance and dominate races. We want to see wheel-to-wheel competition. We want to see press conference drama, drivers who are funny in the paddock. He had a mix of everything, you know. He was really blunt, and I loved it. One of the best drivers ever in the sport.
Well, we'll go to Matt next, but I think that the two standouts, because he's right, Jono, is like if you look at a highlights reel of Montoya, it is him crashing into top drivers. So like you know, there was quite a few clashes with Schumacher, and but then in the against camp, he didn't actually look that good against Ralf Schumacher all the time. So where do you stand, Matt?
Well, I got to say, I do find Montoya to be a highly entertaining driver to watch. He was very quick. He's very talented. But my personal plea would be, can we have the Montoya that drives into the jet dryer, please? Because, oh my, that was so much fun.
Explain.
He was doing, was it a NASCAR race?
Oh,
and they have these, IndyCar, and they have these jet dryers, big, huge. They come out and they basically have a jet engine. They're full of jet fuel, and they use them to dry the track because, you know, they believe in technology and IndyCar and NASCAR, unlike certain other sports I can mention right now. And he just, I don't know, got distracted on the radio or whatever, drove right in the back of it and went up in this massive fireball. It was the coolest thing ever because nobody really got hurt.
Okay, at the moment, I think, Steve, you might have to be a bit of a decider on where we put Montoya.
I mean, Montoya should go in as far as I'm concerned all the reasons that you've said. I always thought that he was someone who gave it, 10 out of 10 every time he got into a car and went to it. Yes, he crashed into a few other people along the way, but that was only because he was trying to, wring everything out of it. Again, I think he got fed up with the organization of F1, and that's what made him leave and go to America. And he did fairly well for quite a few years in America. It's not because he wasn't a good driver. I think he just got the screaming abdabs with the way the sport was run.
And some people are arguing that if you're going to take Montoya, you have to take Ralf Schumacher. Can we not do that rule, please? I don't want Ralf Schumacher on this grid. I want one Schumacher max, and that's going to be Michael. I'm sorry to say, but yes, Ralf could take it to Juan Pablo, but who's the most entertaining of the two? There's no question about it, Juan Pablo Montoya.
Sure, but if you look at the results, Ralf has the results. If you look at the number of podiums, and you've got to look at these results to try and figure out who is actually, going to make the list, Ralf has the numbers, and Montoya doesn't.
Do you know what? That is a really good point. So for me, Montoya was in until that. So for me, Ralf Schumacher takes Montoya out of the definites at the top and puts him down below Villeneuve, because I'm not having Ralf Schumacher in there. Ralf Schumacher does not make the top 20 drivers of the 21st century. It just doesn't happen.
Everyone ruined it.
Yeah, everyone did ruin it. Yeah,
about more. It's the entertainment.
There is
sorry.
This is
Montoya. The reason Jono doesn't want Schumacher in is because Montoya was an entertaining driver to watch. Schumacher might have gotten results, and that's fine if I'm running a team and I'm a team principal. But he was not that same kind of entertaining to watch.
Quick one.
And here's the thing, right? Montoya is fair to say, he's one of my favorite drivers growing up as a kid. I would flick on races that I would never watch before just to watch Juan Pablo Montoya.
Agreed.
I would flick on NASCAR. I'd watch IndyCar in 2014 when he joined in 2014 just to watch Juan Pablo. That's the effect he has on people.
Yeah, but at the moment he is sitting. He's the driver at risk, I would say, at the moment, because he's probably sitting in 11th. Okay, Steve, do you want to nominate a non-champion?
Well, it's got to happen at some stage. And I've got a toss-up here of two. No. I'd have to put in pre-accident Kubica first.
Okay, I think you're gonna get a lot of support
fine
here.
Driver before that.
You're gonna get a lot of support because you have to completely disregard the comeback, which I feel was ill-advised and was never really going to go anywhere. But I think what was underestimated
still outscored Russell.
What was underestimated with his comeback was the amount of Polish support he had. Like, obviously, there was a lot of Polish people in the mid 2000s that came to the UK to work, and if you speak to any of them, man, they were gunning for Robert Kubica, and so that support probably is what got him into what probably shouldn't have been a comeback. But pre-accident, if you look back at, I think it's the 2008 season, isn't it, where you really see what he did in a midfield car.
Not only that, Spanners, but in 2010 and in the Renault, he was, in my opinion, more impressive than 2008. He won a race in 2008, you're right. Like that was where he was sort of had the best car to win a race. But his drives in that Renault in 2010, the rumors came out that I think he was, Matt, if I'm not mistaken, was set up for a Ferrari drive potentially in the future as well.
That was all the talk. Yeah.
Yep.
And the thing, like, just to put the finishing touch on this, one, the man had spectacular crashes, even in Formula One. Everybody remembers Canada, right?
Canada,
Unbelievable. On top of it, you can go find clips of Lewis Hamilton talking about the fact that he thought Kubica was going to be a world champion. So to me, this is probably one of the easiest non-champion picks of the 21st century we could make.
All right.
Yeah, he's definitely in. Got to be. Yep.
Okay, he's in. I like it. Okay, so I'm going to make a nomination here, and I don't think I'm going to find some much support. And I'm not really sure why I feel so strongly about it. I think it's going to be very specifically because I'm 43, but Jean Alesi was one of my very favourites, and I really enjoyed him, driving around in his Ferrari, and so many times, like that Ferrari was just a tank that him and Gerhard Berger were driving around in. It looked like the most understeery car in the world at times. I think it was a good deal heavier than a lot of the other cars. The engine would explode spectacularly, so that was always good. And he will be a driver here. He's a Grand Prix winner. Okay, so if we're looking at any of the names on here that aren't a Grand Prix winner, I'm going to nominate Alesi above it. But he came to life in the rain. He came to life in different strategic situations. And I'm struggling to think of too many examples because I was about, 12, 13.
But if this is about entertaining, you've just chosen one of the most boring drivers to ever get in the car.
Yeah, to talk to, maybe. But thing is, have you seen how now he looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger? He looks like an Arnie.
I'm talking about racing. I mean, God, he was boring in the car and out of it.
Okay, but in the rain, the odd, lazy drive in the rain, he was a proper one of those that came to life.
Well, perhaps. For how many rain races did we have during that period?
Well, there wasn't many races altogether. But go on then, Matt. You shoot me down as well.
No, I'm not going to shoot you down. I'm just going to say, if we're going to talk about Grand Prix winners who have done well in the wet, then you're bringing up Ocon again, as far as I'm concerned.
You're going to keep doing it. All right,
I am going to keep doing it.
You're going to ruin the show.
He's my pick for the person to drive Alonso absolutely bats.
All right.
Because he did that. You have to admit. Alonso completely lost his mind.
Order. We are talking about Jean Alesi in the 90s.
I know. Sorry, I just had to make that little point.
John Alesi and Gerhard Berger were stalwarts of their era, though. They were the proper, and they weren't even journeymen. They were just solid drivers. I think in a time where, there wasn't the top 10 scoring points. There wasn't really random results, and if you didn't win the Panis race in Monaco, maybe you didn't get a real opportunity to kind of regularly kind of pop up there. I just for overall his career, I think he carved out a great career. I just think he's one of the best drivers in F1.
Can we end the John Alesi chat, please?
Okay.
Well, I wanted to bring up Berger. Am I wrong in thinking that Berger was not the best prankster Formula One has ever seen, or was that somebody else I'm thinking?
Well,
No, it's Berger,
it's either
yeah.
Berger or Barrichello, one of the two, yeah.
So,
Berger probably wins.
Ryan Heslen says, Alesi was great in the Tyrrell, after that far too inconsistent. But Matt, did we not say at his peak? So cannot that be individual races? Okay, fine.
Are we going back to what, 1926 or something?
Yeah. Okay. But I was
Poor
just...
Spanners, you're getting hammered by Steve.
Okay, I knew that wasn't going to make it. I just happened... Do you know, the random people that you're fans of at various eras that you wouldn't, defend now, like Riccardo Patrese, John Alesi, two of my favourite 90s drivers. All right then, Matt, nominate a driver for me.
Well, I was actually... Kubica was my one very, very serious. But if I'm going with my theory of you need to nominate the nemesis of Alonso, I would make a genuine argument for Ocon based on the following 4 data points. You can be angry with me if you want.
I am angry with you. This is my...
He's won a race.
Hang on, I'm not disappointed. I'm angry.
And you have to admit, from his time with Perez and his time with Alonso, with the right teammate, he's very, very, very entertaining. So I'm making this more on an entertainment angle, but he does have some results to back it up.
Okay, well, let's see if anyone agrees with you. So I would say, I'm not nominating any of those people apart from Alonso that he had those run-ins with. So, Perez is firmly in the journeyman camp, and I am a big Perez fan, but he's not making the top 20 of the 21st century. And to my mind, neither is Ocon, neither is Hülkenberg, neither is Magnussen, neither is Grosjean. I think Ocon is firmly in that bracket. Jono, can you support Matt?
No, I can't.
He's wasted everyone's time.
Yeah, if I'm going to take a young driver from the last, 5 years, basically around that range, I'm going to take Norris, Leclerc. Well, that's it. I'm going to take those two over Ocon. And by the time we end this list, there's not going to be room for Esteban Ocon. If he's a reserve driver on the best 21st century list, maybe we do take him. So maybe we now create a reserve drivers list and then have him in the... Maybe he does make it.
So what I will say, Matt, is that you made a better case for Ocon than I did for Alesi, but I think we're both losers here. Jono, whilst you mentioned that... Oh, go on. Sorry, Steve.
Yeah.
I was going to say, if you're going to put Ocon in there, well, then Ricciardo's our next person we've got to talk about. He's won more races, got more podiums.
I will say, look, he's a race winner, a multiple race winner. He set the world on light somewhat and became a superstar in Formula One and then quickly fizzled. And he is one of the most likable, one of the most marketable, one of the funniest, coolest. When you talk about the James Hunts of the world, the full-on glamour F1 drivers, Ricciardo is up there. He's almost quintessentially an iconic F1 driver. But let's talk about it now. Does Ricciardo get anywhere near this top 20?
I think he does.
Go on then. Really, Steve? I'm going to argue. I'm going to be against, but make the case.
Oh, well, he's won enough races and had enough podiums. And if we're going to throw in the entertainment value, he is the most entertaining driver we've had on the grid for the last 7 or 8 years, without a doubt. I think the last 4 years, he's 2 years at Renault or Alpine, whichever you want to call it.
Renault, he looked fine. At Renault, he looked fine.
I think he will, but history will show that the bad period in his driving in his career wasn't necessarily his fault, if you know what I mean. I think that he didn't like the team very much. The team didn't support him very well, and the car was a particular dog to drive. And yes, Lando had figured out how to drive it slightly better. Lando's only ever driven one car. Let's put Lando in another make of car and see how he goes. I reckon he'll fall flat in his face.
Jono.
Ricciardo has now driven 3 different sorts of cars. He's now jumped back into the AlphaTauri, Toro Rosso, whatever you want to call it. And he did a fairly good job last weekend. I think that he back on the way up. He sure did first time out. Yeah,
Jono,
first time out. I think that he is, perhaps not in the top 10, but I think he's in the bottom 10.
Jono.
So we've got 13 drivers at the moment. Ricciardo is no question going to make this list.
Ooh,
because if you're going to take
okay.
Ricciardo, then you've got Leclerc, Norris, you've got George Russell. I'm probably forgetting names. We've still got a lot of midfield names to cover here. So your grid's almost full. The reason Ricciardo makes it is because everyone has this recency bias over his McLaren years, where if you look back on it in 20 years' time, you're going to realize it was the car and the team that didn't suit Danny Rick. And there's no question why he's jumped into an AlphaTauri and shown he's still got it. Yes, Yuki had a long pit stop and all that. We won't go into the race review, which was our last podcast, which you can still listen to. But he's still got it and he's always had it. And to me, he's a driver who could take it to a 4-time world champion who forced him out of Red Bull. That's how good Daniel Ricciardo was. Jumped into a new era of car and essentially single-handedly forced Vettel out of the team through his performances. Matched it with a young Max Verstappen, who's by far one of the greatest drivers ever to don our sport. And he's still only won 2 championships. Going to be 3 soon. So he's going to have to go in the maybe pile because you guys, I'm going to blame all 3 of you, had to unfortunately put Button, Rosberg, and all these great drivers in our maybe pile. But Ricciardo's going to eventually make the list.
So I've put Ricciardo above Kimi, but below Rosberg and Button. That's where I'm putting them at the minute. Matt?
Well, I would put Rosberg above Ricciardo, but Ricciardo above the rest for the very simple reasons that Jono enumerates. I mean, he basically chased Vettel out. He ran Verstappen to a draw. He barely beat Ocon when Ocon came back after a year. I mean, it's quite the record he's compiled.
Can I just quickly add, our listeners can't see the list we have at the moment, but Spanners has Montoya last. Can I just request him to be put in the definites, if you don't mind?
No, because of Schumacher. So I think he's still a maybe. I think the Ralph Schumacher argument kind of ruined it.
Get him. Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
It ruined it. Like if people are saying like we have to include Schumacher if Montoya goes in. Okay, Steve, do you want to suggest a driver for us?
Well, I'm probably going to be shot down for being too partisan here, but Webber's got to come into it somewhere just because I'm Australian.
Look, hey, Steve, we've all taken a turn at being completely wrong, so it is your turn. So, okay,
well,
so Steve,
if you actually look at the numbers, he's won 1 more race than Ricciardo and won a bucket load more podiums than Ricciardo. But I think when it comes down to pure racing aggression and whatever, I think Ricciardo has it above Webber. But still, Webber's won a damn lot of races and got 42 podiums. That's not bad.
So I don't think Webber should be in here, but to have this conversation with you, when he came in, wasn't he relatively old when he came into F1, even compared to his peers? And didn't he come in with...
He was 23 or 22 or 23.
Okay. So he came in with Minardi, and I think, and he scored that... Didn't he still score a point when it was top 6?
No, you're right. He was 26. He was a 26-year-old rookie.
There we go.
He wasn't Damon Hill's, 70-year-old rookie.
But at the time, that was old. And he scored that point with Minardi, I think.
A fifth place. He got a 5th place.
Yeah, and I think he did enough. And then he was with Jaguar, wasn't he? At one point. And then when Jaguar became Red Bull, they kind of inherited him a little bit. But for that ultimate kind of dream story of someone coming in with just a sniff of a chance, doing just enough at the right time to put yourself in the right place at the right time, the Mark Webber story is a good story. That's a movie. I think Mark Webber's career is a movie. Matt?
Okay, well, I hate to disappoint all of you, but the only reason Webber isn't a world champion right now is because Red Bull played Pirelli to change the tire specification. Those wobbly sidewall tires that ruined their diffuser. Webber was beating the pants off of Vettel, and there was no way Vettel could drive it as well as Webber did. It was weird. I remember seeing this, and this was before I was really into the technical side of it. But I was like, wow, man, those tires. And then Silverstone happened, and then went back to the old tires, and suddenly Vettel wins everything again. I'm saying right now, not bad for a number 2 driver. Plus, he's entertaining. I want him on the grid.
Ooh.
All right.
That's 2. I'm surprised that there's 2. Okay, go on.
I'm going to end this discussion right now through these next 2 points. Number 1 is, let's be for real, Sebastian Vettel had, what felt like 50,000 mechanical retirements in 2010, regardless of what Mark Webber does in the Bridgestone era, was never going to beat Sebastian Vettel on the racetrack. And he never did, for a reason, in terms of world championship is what I'm talking about here. The second point is, We need to, anybody who is considered mentally a number 2 driver cannot make this list. There's no way. No Mark Webber, no Rubens Barrichello, no Valtteri Bottas. Unfortunately, we're ruling out all 3 of those because that is just not what a best 21st century grid is. There's no way a number 2 driver can make it.
It does feel like Webber accepted that role eventually. Controversially, if you listen to what he said. I
don't think so.
2010?
He left the sport.
Well, 2020 he was very angry.
No, he in 2013, he was still going for a championship. Okay. And you saw that in Malaysia. And as soon as Malaysia happened, he had that Porsche deal lined up straight away.
That was the glass of water in the press conference.
If we're going to go there, then Ricciardo has to go off because he basically walked away from being called that at Red Bull.
But that's the point.
He basically walked
right there, Trumpet.
Where was
he's not considered a number 2 driver because he walked away from it.
Order. Right, okay.
And Ricciardo didn't leave the sport. He just changed teams.
So look, the Australians have strong opinions on Webber and Ricciardo. Who knew? Who could have predicted? Who could possibly have predicted? Right, next up, Scott Speed and Logan Sargent. No, I'm only joking. I'll tell you what, one of the most controversial ones I think that we will have is Felipe Massa. Does anyone make the case for Massa making this top 20? Ooh. Go on then, Matt.
He was a world champion for like 32 seconds.
Oh, no, he wasn't. That's the dumbest argument in the world.
I'm sorry. Hamilton needs somebody to hit. Needs somebody to hit.
Okay.
Besides Max. He needs someone to hit besides Max. And I think Massa could be that driver.
Okay, so to be fair, Hamilton hit Massa in like 2009 in 17 of the 17 races. But look, Massa wasn't world champion for any amount of time. He briefly was statistically like on path to win, and all the Glock stuff is garbage. And I can't. Anyone who thinks that Glock handed Hamilton the championship, look at the onboards of both the Toyota drivers in the final laps of the Brazilian Grand Prix, and it's clear as day. So Massa, obviously, he had that accident where he had that piece of gearing or whatever going to his helmet. But before that, people were talking about him in very grand terms. So even Schumacher was saying like, "Oh, I'm going to retire so that Massa can be champion."
No,
I still feel like when you look at the relative careers of Kimi Raikkonen and Felipe Massa compared to, say, Lewis Hamilton, and you look at how close it was in 2008, the conclusion from that is that Ferrari 2008 car was the greatest F1 car of all time to bring Massa that close. It should not have been that close. That might be harsh, but I don't see Massa. Nothing at the time made me think, oh yeah, Massa's going to be considered one of the all-time greats in F1.
I'd have to agree with you. I mean, he was there forever and raced many races and has lots of stats, but there was just nothing inspiring about him. There was nothing that made him stand out above the crowd as being, a potential champion, I don't think.
All right, so
I was going to say I'll add to that in the sense that I totally agree with Spanners and you as well, Steve, is like he had multiple chances to win a world championship, regardless of the unfortunate accident he had in 2009. And then Alonso and he's the dark horse that ruins Felipe Massa. Alonso comes in and proves the difference between a driver who can make a bad car win a world championship, although ironically he didn't. But you get my point, is that he can contend, and Felipe Massa wasn't there. So
right,
I think that's a quick one. Massa out.
Massa out. Okay, let's do some quick fire ones, guys. So I'm going to go through some, and we'll see if there's any gnashing of teeth over any of these nominations. But okay, Coulthard. Can anyone make the case for Coulthard? I know it's come up a lot in the live chat. For me, that's a no for me.
Only what we do is if Matt and I's intangible theory comes in, we want savvy veterans and we want good veterans and people who
that
are just
chin.
good
I just want that.
You
chin.
want the chin. It's a great chin.
We want the chin in. He's a maybe just for the chin.
Giancarlo. Go on. Sorry.
And he survived a plane crash, so that gives him
rock solid.
Kudos.
Like the cheerleader out of Heroes. Okay, bit of a flashback.
But there you.
Giancarlo Fisichella. I think it could have been. I think if Giancarlo Fisichella was a driver now, you might be saying, "Oh, he is nibbling around the edges." But I don't think anyone's going to make a strong case for that. We've got a lot of journeyman drivers who've been suggested. Perez, Hulkenberg, Magnussen,
Trulli,
Trulli, Yarno Trulli. No one's making the case for Yarno Trulli. I don't think
Trulli
he's
is
going
banned
up.
from the sport for life.
Can I just throw one thing out there, and this will be very quick, is that Toyota, who spent the most money for the 2010 season and never raced their car, which turned out to be Pirelli's test car and blah, blah, blah. There's a whole history to that people can go and Google after they listen to the podcast. Basically, Yarno Trulli could have been part of Toyota in 2010, which is rumored to be the quickest car that year that never raced. And he could have been a world champion, and we could have been putting him on this list. Just pointing that out.
He would have driven around in third with the whole field stuck behind him.
Yeah, there you go. The Trulli train. There we go. I want to put in a cheeky nomination for Johnny Herbert because not only did he go into F1 already with an injury that was limiting him, he was a multiple race winner, and I think he was doing it in an era of great drivers that were considered much higher than him and carved out like a really decent career. I just think Johnny Herbert does not get the love and respect because when you watched it at the time, his results sort of seemed to come out of nowhere as well. And for me, it's that same kind of feeling I had with Perez, where I go, well, where's that win come from? And but Johnny Herbert didn't have his time, at Red Bull behind Verstappen to make him look a bit silly. So I'm gonna nominate Johnny Herbert if anyone's gonna fight me on that.
No, he was really talented, especially. I mean, you see the difference, but kind of like Massa before and after the accident. And it was really a shame because he was that talented as a driver.
All right. Okay. Do we have any late nominations coming through? People are really fighting for Coulthard, but Jono, what you got?
I've got. Can we just knock off like the young guns that I mentioned before?
Yeah,
so I'm talking Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris.
Okay, I want Leclerc in there. Leclerc. I think that's a no-brainer. I know.
Yeah.
Don't you dare put Leclerc.
It's too early. It's too early in their career for that. Maybe they'll make it. In 5 years' time, but they haven't proven themselves yet.
Okay, hang on. So at the moment, that is a draw, but you have to admit the old crusties, Jono, they were more like fervent against than we were fervent for.
Yeah. Well, look, I think they've done enough. I personally think, like right now, I think George Russell's certainly done enough. The dude's. I mean, yeah, he hasn't been statistically winning races and stuff, but has he had the car to do it? He's done incredible stuff in the Williams. George Russell goes in there, definitely. And I think you got to say Lando Norris is probably more of a maybe yet. I think Russell and
really,
we got to put in.
I mean, I feel like if you get into Russell, Norris, I think, has more credibility than Russell does at this point. If you're going to put Russell in, then why aren't we putting Ocon in, who's at least won an actual race?
Oh, but please. Now, how we
not
won that
but
race,
please.
Okay?
Not but please.
Well, Bottas ping-ponging the whole grid, it helps him win. Can I just add one thing? Is that if Steve is correct on anything, it's if we look at this in 10 years, Norris makes the best 21st century grid. We'll see how his career pans out. But at the moment, he's a bit nip and tuck only because he's young and fresh. That's the only reason why he might not make this grid.
It's the same reason that Piastri is not going to make this list, but in 5 years' time may well be on it.
Right. Now then, some wild cards, guys. Let's make some serious nominations for who else should make this list. Who's in? Go on then, Matt.
Okay. Well, I mean, my theory of, well, you know what? I'm going to say this. Can I have a special memorial moment? There's one driver I saw race that I really would have liked to have seen how their career went. I can't really put them on this list based on their results because they only drove for Manor. But I think we'd be remiss if we didn't at least mention the name Jules Bianchi, because everybody who saw him race and knew him talked about him like he was, much like Kubica, a future world champion. So I just want to put him out there as someone I would put on this grid just to see what happened, even though he doesn't have the results, admittedly.
So when you look at, say, Bianchi's rookie season, and you look at his overtake on, I think, Kobayashi into Raskas at Monaco, that's every bit as iconic as Lewis Hamilton diving down the insiders of Alonso in those early races, or scrapping early on with Kimi Raikkonen at Spa-Francorchamps. He definitely had that potential. When you look at the point, he got a point for Manor. I think that was Monaco as well, wasn't it? And I think
it was their point, yeah.
And I think he got a top 10 qualifying as well. So yes, obviously there's not going to be the time and the evidence to put him on this list, but I think that is an absolutely fantastic honourable mention. So who else has got some midfield wild cards? Jono, come on, hit me.
Well, I don't know. I was going to suggest, like, can we have and Matt and I are really, like, advocating for a sort of fun, reckless driver here.
Okay.
Maldonado.
Why?
Can he make the list?
No, not obviously not. Kobayashi. No.
There are all the Red Bull drivers that got canned before they could prove themselves. You know, Jamie Alguersuari and you know the rest of his mates that all went off to Formula E. Some of those looked like they were going to be damn good drivers before they got bounced by Red Bull.
And Maldonado won a race. Ocon won a race. Why can't Maldonado be on the list? That's, you know, does that
he's
rule
on
no
my
for
he's
you
on
now,
my
Matt?
chaos agents list.
Okay,
I feel like we need some teams. Like, we have teams that are full of serious drivers, and that's great. But if we want entertainment, we need chaos agents. We need people who bring out the safety car at inopportune times. Maldonado is at the top of my list because he's a decent driver, but he can't pay attention for a whole race, so he crashes all the time.
Sorry, Steve. John. I was going to say, in Slack, Chris Fonseca's just gone, how about Nick Heidfeld as a suggestion? And I'm like, you know what? It's just, we're talking about entertainment here, and that's a big unwritten rule for this list, Nick Heidfeld is just not entertaining enough to be on this list.
It certainly doesn't spark, passion. There's a lot of drivers like that, like Heinz-Harald Frentzen as well. At the time was sort of briefly fancied as a future champion, and it didn't just quite spark.
I mean, there's Robert Dornbos. There's a whole bunch of them, but none of them have got the wherewithal to make the list at all in any way.
So this is interesting. I actually thought we would be kind of fighting more, but the drivers that we don't want on the list actually got dismissed fairly quickly. So here's our grid at the moment, and we've got Hamilton, Verstappen, Vettel. Vettel's made it. Schumacher, Alonso, Hakkinen, Kubica, Rosberg, Ricciardo, Button, Raikkonen, Villeneuve, Montoya, Webber, Herbert, and that still leaves 5 places on the grid. And I think we're struggling to put drivers in there. So I think Leclerc makes it in that zone. I think Coulthard probably makes it at this rate, doesn't he?
How about George Russell? When
we're struggling for people, I don't think George Russell. Look, George Russell at the moment is the second best driver at Mercedes, and he only.
I have 2.
May I finish, sir?
Where are you?
May I finish,
Lucas
sir? May I finish, sir? So he's the second. May I finish, sir? I can, because I've got the fader. So yeah, he's the second best driver at Mercedes, and really he was beating who? Kubica at Williams.
Yeah. What about Grosjean? He won. He did reasonably well. I mean, he crashed lots, but he did reasonably well too.
Well, his best season was in the 2013 Lotus, which was a great car, which could have won a world championship had they had a different driver other than Grosjean in it.
Well, there you go. That eliminates him. Marcus Ericsson, Indy 500 winner.
Yes, you're into my chaos agents again.
Oh my God. Do you know what?
Should we go through my chaos agents if we have the space on the grid?
Do you know what? At the moment, there's space on the grid for Ocon.
Great. I'll take that.
Can we add to chaos? I know, look, it's a bit insulting putting Kobayashi as a chaos agent. I don't think he's that, as a chaos agent, but everything about Kobayashi was fun. 2010 Suzuka, if anyone remembers who watched F1 12, 13 years ago.
I do remember.
Best overtaking performances ever in the sports history. And the name Kobayashi, like, he's in just for the name.
Okay.
That is in.
You all know, I don't know if I've mentioned it recently, I was a massive Kobayashi fan at the time.
We both were.
Yeah.
He was fantastic.
And again, he was one of these drivers that could kind of pluck a race out of his backside, just sort of from nowhere.
They took him from nowhere. He'd never driven anything like a Formula One car. They threw him into it, and he immediately was making Alonso furious because he was driving like, I don't know who you are. I'm just going to pass you and then not let you by me.
Wow.
It was fantastic.
I haven't brought this up because I thought I would just get ridiculed, but I was a real low-key Kobayashi fan. And when his career ended, it was quite funny because he then wanted to raise money to basically be a crowd-funded paid driver. And that's a really good idea. That's the kind of thing that could have taken off, but they couldn't quite raise enough. But I think he raised $1 million, but that couldn't buy him an F1 seat. So he just went, okay, no, it's not going to work. But he kept it anyway to just fund other racing, which I'm sure wasn't the intent from the people who supported him on crowdfunding. But anyway, okay, good. It looks like Kobayashi might sneak in. There's some silly suggestions here. Hulkenberg. Do you know what? I have a lot of respect for drivers who can carve out midfield careers. and who can stay around in F1 for a long time. People aren't hiring Hülkenberg because he's rubbish. They're hiring him consistently because he can do a job. And I think there's a lot of drivers that fall into that. You know, Perez has been hired by 2 top teams, 2 front-running teams now. Grosjean has been hired by teams, Hülkenberg, all those drivers there. But none of them are going to be, top 20 drivers. Same
you
with
need
Bottas.
someone who's going to win a race, be on a podium. And Hülkenberg, as good as he is, he'll take all of your points for you up until the podium. And then he'll mess it up because he always has.
So I think we're coming to an end of this specific discussion if no one is going to nominate anyone else. And I'm a little bit surprised at where our grid is at the moment, to be honest.
I think if we're down to this desperate last measures, we should probably throw Sainz in there. He's won a race. He's very savvy. He's smart, and he's entertaining on the radio. I mean, like clearly we didn't nominate enough drivers because we don't have 20 people on the grid yet. So I'm just throwing out names here, people.
Here's the game: is George Russell is our yardstick, and if anyone can prove me why George Russell, that a driver should be in this list apart from George Russell, they go in. Right now, George Russell needs to make this list. We've got 2 spots left.
We've got 2.
Has George Russell won a race?
No. In fact, so if we've got 2 spots left.
Oh, right. Brazil. Yes, you're correct.
He has, yeah. So I'm actually putting Fisichella back in because I'm putting Fisichella back. He's a race winner as well. He won the Interlagos.
No
he won Brazil as well.
Twos.
Oh, how is he a
number
number
2?
2?
Oh, come on. He had 2 world championship cars. Please. You're a number 2.
Okay, you're right. Okay. So we've only got 18 out of this 18-car grid. So, right. Any last pushes for these last 2 spots?
So we're okay.
Steve, you're on mute.
Definite?
Steve, you're on mute.
Oh, Steve, go.
Yeah, Takuma Sato, maybe?
You've not put Ocon down. What's wrong with you?
You can't have Sato or what was the other one? Or Esteban Ocon and say no to Norris and George Russell. I'm going to keep saying it. There's no way you can. Okay. This is a tough one. One spot left. This is tough.
Do you know what? They are 2 possible future generators of the drivers now who we can't yet prove have potential. I think you're absolutely right. Norris and Russell in this ability level they have now, probably mix it with the top 20 drivers or the other 18 drivers who we are going to be nominating today. So put these drivers at their peak in the car that they're comfortable with on a grid. You are probably right, Jono. Norris and Russell go toe to toe with them. But I think we got stuck in whole career. Have they done enough to prove that? They're probably already there. So here's our grid. Here's our top 20 grid. Imagine seeing these 20 drivers on track together. Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, Sebastian Vettel, Michael Schumacher, the only Schumacher, Fernando Alonso, Mika Hakkinen, Robert Kubica, Nico Rosberg, Daniel Ricciardo, Jenson Button, Kimi Raikkonen, Jacques Villeneuve, Juan Pablo Montoya. Did Webber make it in the end? Yes or no? Mark, we're putting Mark Webber on because of the story.
Oh.
Mark Webber. No, Webber's out. Webber's out.
Johnny Herbert. 19.
No, Johnny Herbert, Leclerc, Kobayashi, Norris, Russell. We've only got 19. We've got 1 spot left.
You know who I'm going to say.
Coulthard
Webber got 42 podiums. How can you just take him out?
Who got 42 podiums?
But Webber, half of the people that you've put in there, Norris, Russell, whatever, have got 1 or 2 podiums. I'm gonna
put Webber in because I'm scared of Uncle Steve, and that concludes our top 20. I've loved this show. I've loved the loosey-goosey nature of it, and I've loved having a scrap with my panelists here. I'm sure there's a lot of people yelling at the screen, and no, Andrew, we're not desperate enough for Eddie Irvine, not at this stage. So what we'll do is we'll put our final order and our final grid in the show notes. Please do debate us. We can be reached feedback at missedapex.net, spanners at missedapex.net, Matt at missedapex.net. Follow us. All our social media links are in the show notes below, and we will see you for the Belgian Grand Prix race review on Sunday. Until we see you next, work hard, be kind, and have fun. This was Missed Apex Podcast. My goodness, that was the most arguey, episode of Missed Apex ever. I'm surprised, man. I'm surprised how much we were scrambling around for people to add. Well, there you go. I'm sure people are going to be yelling at us. But even the live chat didn't have more people to suggest.
No, it just goes to show you, though, that those people that deserve a spot are few and far between.
Yeah.
You know, we hear lots of names, but they disappear and we never think about them again.
Exactly. Yeah. And out of the 137, actually, it's not surprising that when we're talking about the greats that we want in our top 20, that there was only 20 to arrive at. Mm-hmm. So we'll let ourselves off. Nice one. Oh, Matt, do we do that thing with the comment of the week? Or have you been too busy gunning for Ocon to bother?
Whoever suggested Sebastian Bourdais gets comment of the week.
I've got three that I could read that I was able to pick up because apparently, I mean, normally our chat is quite funny, but it's been quite angry. They were very what argumentative today.
I'll play the bumper.
Comment of the week.
Go for it, Mr. Trumpets.
We'll start with Jason G. This is like me and my friends playing Risk, where we have to clarify our house rules, and that takes longer than the actual game.
Yes. No, that's true. Risk and Catan. They're the two where it's like, hang on. Oh, or Uno. Uno is surprisingly controversial as well.
We have Stuart Bicallis. Leave Kimmy alone. He knows what he is doing.
Nice one, Stuart. Nice one.
That's very classic. And then we'll finish up with Holler, who says, agreeing with me, Joss was on fire.
Literally. Oh my God.
But he was literally on fire.
No. Do you know what? I had that poster on my bedroom for the longest time where Verstappen had the spray of the fuel and then it ignited and it was just a fireball in the Benetton.
Yeah, in the Benetton. And this is actually one of the reasons why I included Joss is because one of my favorite Formula One authors is Steve Matchett, who was an announcer on Formula One TV here in the United States when I was watching again. And he was a mechanic. He was one of the head mechanics at Benetton at the time. Verstappen and Schumacher were there. He's written several books about it. But anyway, that doesn't have anything to do with who won today's comment of the week. So that's going to be... It's got to be Jason G. This is like me and friends playing Risk where we have to clarify our house rules and that takes longer than the actual game.
Nice one, Jason.
Comment of the week.